Why do you think we don't know more about the guy who shot you in the ear?
Yeah, no, well, and the second one with all of his cell phones. So I want to find the answers. I've told them. In fact, today I said, I want to find, we can no longer blame Biden for that one. He should have released that a long time ago. So they are giving me a report next week sometime, and I do believe I'll be releasing. I want to release the report.
President Trump says he's willing to release the report on the assassination attempts against him. The one in Butler, Pennsylvania, happened over 7 months ago now. Why don't we know more about it? Investigative journalist Matt Taibbi is here now. Matt, you know, from your perspective, you're an investigative journalist, you're a curious guy, you dig deep. I think this is fascinating that we don't know more, and I'll take some responsibility for that. I've only had my own show for about 2 months now, but we should be digging in on this. But it's not just the media. I can't believe there haven't been more accountability and more information released to the public about a would-be assassination, 2 of them, on a presidential candidate.
It was really a strange incident this summer. You know, the story was huge news for about a day, and then subsequently we were told some odd facts. The FBI released information that they had interviewed 100 different witnesses who were familiar with the suspect, but they had no motive evidence whatsoever. They couldn't tell us anything at all about why this shooting had taken place. And then the story just sort of fell out of the news cycle really quickly. There was a House investigation where there were general recommendations given to the Secret Service, but there was really nothing about why this happened. And it's an odd lack of curiosity, not only on the part of the media, which dropped the story like a hot potato, but also on the part of the investigating bodies, which I think is what we're about to find out now, is that they perhaps pursued other leads they didn't tell us about.
And no accountability, by the way. I don't know that anybody from the Secret Service, you know, has been held accountable for whatever failed that day. Clearly something failed. You said an interesting phrase. You said an odd lack of curiosity. Whenever you encounter an odd lack of curiosity, you seem to think, well, there's a reason for that lack of curiosity. And we could apply that to any number of stories that you and I have lived through, even in the last 5 years. Oh, you're not curious about? We can just pick one. Vaccine injury? You're not curious about it at all? Does that mean there's no story, or in fact there is a much bigger story? If I apply past rationale to this, there's a much bigger story on these assassination attempts.
I think you make a great point. I mean, look at the COVID origin story. We were essentially told at the outset of that episode that we weren't to investigate the possibility of anything but a zoonotic origin of the virus. Remember, Tom Cotton tried to make some pretty anodyne remarks about that in the Senate and was roundly blasted for doing it. There were people who commented online and who had their comments suppressed. And then subsequently, we had the Department of Energy, the FBI, and the CIA all say that they thought it was more likely that it came from a Wuhan lab. But we had to wait 3 years for that to even be discussable. I think the same kind of thing is happening with the assassination topic. There were early reports that made it to the newspapers about the possibility of accomplices, but then we heard nothing about that. We didn't hear anything about whether or not they were investigating that further for months. So it's a strange thing. I would like to know whether or not they pursued that fully and what they found when they did.
Well, I think for you, a guy like you, Matt, who has plenty of fertile ground to plow, and I would like to think what I hope we can do on this show as well, is anytime you're told, don't look here, this isn't interesting, don't be curious, or don't use critical thinking, which I think applies as well to the war with Russia and Ukraine, then you know you're over fertile ground. Then you know you're over an issue that deserves some attention. And that's what we experienced with COVID. And by the way, Jay Bhattacharya, who's the new head of the NIH, he went before Senate today, and he talked about that time period and the suppression of, you know, not just critical thought, but speech as well. Watch this, Matt.
The pandemic is a very difficult thing. There's so many people are going to have different ideas in an environment of uncertainty. The root problem was that people who had alternative ideas were suppressed. personally was subject to censorship by the actions of the Biden administration during the pandemic. Science, to succeed, needs free speech. It needs an environment where there's tolerance for dissent.
And I mean, the most fascinating thing about that, Matt, is science of all places needs dissent. Science of all places needs disagreement and debate.
Yeah, it was a very strange thing. People were repeating mantras like "believe the science," except that science is argument. So it made no sense. You showed Jay Bhattacharya there. I know Jay very well. I got to know him after the Twitter files. One of the first things that we found in the Twitter files actually was a screenshot of Twitter's internal readout of Jay's account, which had a big thing on it that said Trends Blacklist. That was our first proof that they were doing shadow banning, which they had denied up until that time. And we subsequently found out that there was a long list of people who didn't even have particularly odd ideas about COVID. They just had ideas that ran counter to government policy. And these things were considered to suppress or increase hesitancy. So therefore, it was a form of misinformation. Jay is a renowned scientist. All he really did was an experiment that showed that COVID was both more infectious and less deadly than we were being told. And for that, he was suppressed for years, which is ridiculous.
And as you reported and shared with us, not just at the behest of X, then Twitter, but at the behest of government officials asking it to be done on X and Facebook and Google and YouTube. So let's bring this home, Matt, together. What subjects, like if you gave me the top 5 list, Matt, we could do top 3 for matters of time. What subjects were the most off limits as you dug into the Twitter files? What subjects got you blacklisted? What subjects were the ones where you weren't allowed to be curious or have critical thinking or disagreement?
COVID had to be in the top 3. I think the Ukraine war was up there. And then Russiagate probably is a tie with 2020 election issues. Certainly, they automatically banned anybody who had expressed any kind of skepticism about the 2020 election result. But even before the elections, they were getting rid of a lot of people who were, saying anything that could be construed as misinformation. But COVID and the wars were the big ones, I would say.
Okay, and then to our point, that means the fertile ground to do real journalism right there, if you're being told not to,
exactly.
Which I know you do,
Mm-hmm.
And you guys should check out Matt Taibbi. I always appreciate having you on, Matt. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Will. Take care.